realism or to be realistic? For those of you who are listening, most of you probably heard these words and phrases before. To be realistic means to look at things from a balanced perspective, seeing that there are both strengths and weaknesses in every argument. There are pros and cons in people and things. Now today, instead of doing a video on realism, I'm actually going to go on to Machiavellianism. Now, for those of you who are wondering, wait, there's pros of this? I can understand where you're coming from, but I thought that seeing as the person I'm doing the video on today is better known for this, I thought I would leave realism to someone who's more modern, and that would be Ayn Rand. I'm not butchering her name, and I will be covering her in the new year. So anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Live from the historic Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, J.D. Salinger presents Hollywood stars and celebrities. What do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out! All right, here we go!
Welcome to the show, Niccolo Machiavelli. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, and you found your trailers to your taste. Mamma mia! This was disgraceful. Just because I'm Italian does not mean you put pizza in the trailer. I eat other things other than pizza. What, like pasta? No! Don't be so offensive. And what's with my voice? I would not sound like this, sir. Oh, you silly English swine. Oh, actually, I'm quarter Italian. I figure that you would like it. I mean, I like pasta and pizza. Well, no, I like other things as well. I do like the pasta, but, no, that's beyond the point. This is unacceptable. Oh, we've seemed to have lost sound there on your mic. I'm very sorry about that. Well, without further ado, let's go behind the history of your life. Okay, so Niccolo Machiavelli was around during the Renaissance period. This was a time in European history that took place between the 14th century history, and it's sort of like the gap between the Middle Ages and modern history, the Revolutionary period and the Industrial period, things like that. So the movement started in Italy, Venice, Florence, those sort of areas, and then spread out throughout Europe. Like the things that was around that time that were like sort of the intellectual basis of humanism started coming around as well. And the Greeks, they were rediscovered because they sort of went out of influence for quite a while when Christianity was first brought in by the Romans. So that got rediscovered, like Plato, Aristotle, those sort of readings, because they were quite famous in the Middle East still, but they sort of got brought in at that time. And it was a lot of art came around at this time. So you had things like Michelangelo, that statue of that nude guy that's in Italy, in Florence, like a lot of oil paintings, knowledge, things like that. So yeah, and it was all about literature, learning, classical sources, poetry. There was a lot going on basically at this time. So like I said, it actually started in Florence, and that is where Nico actually ended up living, or Niccolo, should we say. Yeah, so it was a period that was where really the culture started to advance. However, it was also becoming a bit pessimistic as well. When I'll go on later, you'll see why. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go over the actual book itself, The Prince, as I think it's important to get some background information about Machiavellian principles, which are all inside The Prince. And it's just a bit of detail. If you're not interested in that, I will add a link and you can click on there and you can skip straight to the pros and cons of Machiavellian thinking. However, I do advise, if you haven't read The Prince or you just want to learn a bit more, you can, I go into a little bit of detail, but I'll try and go through this as quick as possible, but just pick out the key points that I got from reading this. So the first two chapters are really like an introduction, and they tell about the two sort of ruling classes in Europe at the time, and you either had republics, as I've covered in my other video, or principalities, and they were sort of like smaller segments of like land or areas that are ruled by princes or kings, things like that. Like it was all divided into different states, and the point that he puts across is that it's easier to rule your own principality, an area you start off with, than it is to rule over one that you've just newly acquired, because when you come to that land, if you're already at the land that you own, people know who you are. They know the family. They're more likely to trust you. Whereas if you've just newly acquired a bit of land, they're like, "Who's this? I don't know who he is." It's like if you've got someone who's come out of nowhere and they're like, oh, I'm leading you now, you know, you're going to be concerned. What's going to happen to my housing? Are they going to change the rules around here? Am I going to lose my land? Am I going to get fed? How is this going to affect my businesses? Things like that. And this is basically what he's going over, the two different ones, and just putting a point across that, you know, it's basically like a little bit of advice if you are going to take someone's land, which he goes into later about this sort of stuff, but, you know, you just need to be cautious that they're not going to have instant respect for you. Okay, so the 4th chapter now goes on to how to deal with these issues of taking someone else's land. So he says one way is to move the prince from the current land that he owns to the new invaded one. So he starts this, you know, building himself reputation there because, you know, he's like, oh, he's moved to this land. He also said that it'd be a good idea to start colonies in the newly acquired area. So then, you know, you've got people that already know you. Of course, the people that currently live there might not be too happy about that, but, you know, many countries have set up colonies before. Like I said, the prince is very influential to some people that we've, you know, looked at it, and it's sort of a good way to rule in a way. Like, maybe not a good way, but it's like I said, it's a guide in how to some ways to rule. They also say that the country that has been invaded, you know, is the weaker power is going to side with the stronger power. So, you know, when there's little problems that are occurring, it's better to deal with these problems straight away before you just leave them, because if they get too big, these problems, and then they become too powerful, then you've got a big issue acquired. So later on in the book, Niccolo starts to go on about how a citizen, you know, should be a good example, and, you know, through fortune and perhaps hard work, they can, you know, maybe lucky enough to become the prince or, you know, ruler of a certain area. He says it's actually better to have you know, rulers who rely on fortune are less likely to be successful in holding power over states, because, you know, if you rely on luck, basically, because that's what fortune is, if you rely on it, you know, it might not always go your way, so it's better to have prowess instead. Now, as I said, he goes on about how good it is to be, you know, private citizens can sometimes be lucky enough to become a prince if it works in their favour. And he does say that there's two things really that can become an issue for a prince, and that is fortuna. And what that is, and I hope I'm not butchering that word, but I do like this word, it's basically luck. He says you could have all the best skills, the best armies, but if you haven't got luck, things could not work. You know, things aren't going to work out for you. You know, or they might work out for you, but they might not work out as well as you think on paper. And he's saying that it doesn't matter how good a ruler you are, if you don't have fortuna, you're screwed, basically. And yeah, that's where the word fortune comes from, fortuna. So if you don't have luck, yeah. He then goes and says how, you know, there's different types of a way that a ruler can be. You can be cold-hearted and calculating. So I think of someone like Emperor Palpatine. He's the main villain from Star Wars, for those who don't know. Now, he is someone who rules through fear, and he's saying that if your subjects fear you enough, you know, you've got to find a nice balance between fear and, you know, being likable. So if you're someone who's really likable, I mean, think of someone who you might be close to, or someone you might have heard of who's really likable. Now, they may be likable, but think how much respect do they have? Do they have a lot? Now, chances are they're not going to have a lot of respect, and this is where realism starts to come into it. What Machiavelli was trying to say was, if, you know, rulers like, oh yeah, we'll give them what they want and give them this and that, you know, people start walking over you, and they'll be like, oh, you know what, I might take his land, I might just, you know, take him out, you know. But you also don't want to be like Emperor Palpatine, because, you know, if people fear you, they might fear you, you know, they might be like, wow, I'm not living under fear, I'm going to take him out. So what he's trying to say is you can rule through absolute fear, so people are so terrified they will not rebel whatsoever, so you won't have any rebellion because they're just terrified as to what the consequences are if you go against that prince, that leader. Or you can choose to, but if they don't fear you, and if they, you know, if you go, but there's always a chance that they may fear you, but they're still going to uprise anyway. So he was saying it's better off to be a nice ruler, but not too nice. So you've really got to find that balance. You've got to show leadership skills, basically, because you're not going to have someone who's, you know, that basically just going to let everyone walk over him. They're not going to be a good ruler, are they? So Machiavelli then goes on to how to be a benevolent ruler, you know, someone who's all good. but not complete pushover. So he says the reason for why you should do that is that in times of war, if the people like you enough and respect you, they're going to fight to the very end. I mean, if you look at, whereas if they don't respect you, they might be like, we might actually help another principality take over this land, and maybe they can do, maybe I'll do well out of it. So if they respect you, they're going to fight for you to the very end. You're going to have a good army, even if it's this, you're arming farmers. Okay, they're not going to be the best, but they're going to fight for a cause they believe in. Whereas if they don't respect you, they're not. And then he goes on about mercenaries and how it's always best to have your own army or your own people. I said even the farmers, because at the end of the day, mercenaries are only there for money. And I found it quite interesting that mercenaries were for hire back then. I always used to think mercenaries was more of a newer thing, but anyway, that's not about me. So yeah, mercenaries, if they don't, if they're losing, they might be like, screw this, is just a job. They're not really in it. They're in it for the money. They're not in it for the ruler. So it's always best to have your own army, your own people that like you, because if they don't like you enough, they're going to rebel against you and cause all sorts of problems. And he does use some examples throughout, but I said I'm trying not to make this too long. Now, of course, as I said, he was quite cynical, so now we're going to go look at ruling from a dark perspective. So he said it really is no problem pitting people against each other. And if you look at today's modern politics, it happens all the time. You've always got people pitting against each other. So at the time, it was a lot more divided in disparity in wealth. So, you could pit the nobles against the lower classes, like the serfs or the peasants. And, he says that, really you could do that to your favour. You could, let's say you want to get rid of someone who's got a lot of power. Maybe they're not as high as you, or even if they are as high as you. If you win over these peasants or serfs, or it could work the other way around, but if you win over a certain group, you could get them to take out your enemies. And, you're not going to tell them that, but you can manipulate people. And this is that's one of the examples of the book being quite cynical, because he's not, this is quite immoral, really, to do that sort of thing. But that's what he was saying, a ruler could do that use that to their advantage. Another thing that Niccolo said was not to worry too much about the trends of popular opinion. And what he means by that is that it's only really best to act on that when it will go on an advantage. So, for instance, let's say, you're not being too evil, but, I don't know, you raise taxes. Let's say that's a really unpopular opinion or something like that. And so you start raising taxes and more and more and more, and people are starting to get peeved off. But then you could also end up distracting them and go, let's say they wanted, I don't know, like you give them you throw them a bone. So you give them a load of taxes, but you go, hey look, got a food bank over there. Or, of course, that's not something that you'd have back then, but I'm just trying to give an example. So you basically put them off. They're like, oh, he's giving me that. So you're showing a bit of generosity there. And you're not being completely cruel to them. You're giving them food bank. It's not the best option, but you're giving them something. So it sort of puts out that flame. It doesn't stoke the fire as much. It sort of puts it down. And as I was saying, it's only really best to go by popular opinion when it will go towards your advantage. So, if people are going to like, oh, I've got another political opponent here who's going to give lower taxes. Oh, well, here, I'll give you this. No, okay. You're throwing the bone. Not everyone's going to be happy, but it's probably going to lower the amount of people that are peeved off, basically. Another cynical thing that he puts across, and you probably recognise this in your modern day politicians, was he says, it's okay to break promises. If it works in your advantage to break promises, like I said earlier with the food banks, things like that, if it works well for you, people may hate you for it. And like I said, it's not good to be hated, but that they're gonna part with it to a point. And if it ends up working in your favour, so you've got something going on behind the scenes, and then you publicise that good thing that you did, people, like I said, aren't really going to care so much about it, or it's not going to be aware as much in the news if you decept them. Basically, it's a bit of deception. So he does point out that image is as important as action as well, and that, like I said, the prince should take credit for any success he takes. But he should still keep to the politics of that state. So if there's a certain type of rule, he should keep to that sort of thing. Because he says that although some people that may be hated, stop that. Another thing he puts wrong, and this is like another modern day issue, is guns, or this time it wouldn't be guns, it would just be weapons. And what it says is the prince should be cautious about taking away people's rights to arms, because if he goes into an area that, you know, every folk has guns and he takes them away from them, it's going to breed a lot of distrust for him as the new ruler. So they're saying that although an army would be the best option, it's always good to just keep your own citizens armed, because they're going to sort of trust you. They're not going to have this distrust. And like I said, when it comes to a conflict or war, they're more likely to take up these arms and fight for you. There is a chance, however, that they could rise against you, but like I said, you haven't pissed them off at this point. You haven't annoyed them. So yeah, just as long as you're cautious, you should be alright. It also says how a prince should take, encourage the citizens to excel in occupations. Just so keep them happy, keep them working, keep them busy, and he shouldn't. But at the same time, he shouldn't be afraid to tax them highly, because it could do well. And another thing he goes on later is that when it comes to a conflict, it's always good to have the occasional ally. And when you go into war with someone, you claim that it's for a good cause. This country is under attack. We're going to help them. It's for a good cause. And when it happens, if it goes badly, don't mention it. You try and hide under the rug. Some people will care about it, but like I said, if you keep quiet about it, it should hopefully go away. Like I said, this is all. I said you could use this in many examples today. But if you go to a war, even if it's not for your benefit, you lie about it. Just say, yeah, it's great. We did it. We are the good people. We're the good guys, and basically to claim effort for it. And this all works well for the ruler. So the last point in the book was really just talking about flatterers, and this is about getting advice. And he says to watch out for people, yes men, people who disagree with everything you say. He says that a prince should always seek for advice, but only when they need it, basically. So not just to keep yourself and go, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, because at the end of the day, it's what the prince wants. But if there's something he's not sure about and he's got advisors, he should ask them, because but if someone goes up to him and says, oh, do this, it's only if he doesn't want it to toss it aside. It's up to the prince at the end of the day. And that's really where the book ends. He then goes on about who he wrote it for. He writes there's a few extra chapters, but it's not really as relevant to the topic we're going to talk about today. So that was The Prince, and hopefully this wasn't too long and you're still here. Okay, so what exactly are the pros of Machiavellian approach to things? Now, even Niccolo, when he was writing this book, though he was writing it as an advisement, some say satire, to his friend, he did put for some points. So the first main thing to take from this book really is, do the ends justify the means? And what Niccolo puts across here as an argument is that no matter how bad things may be, casualties in war, for example, let's take this, and you start the people were dying and things like that, does it justify all those deaths? If that means there's going to be peace at the end of it, or you're let's say you're helping a nation that's got a terrible tyrant leader, and you have decided to take over, stop that tyranny, but as a result you've got all these casualties in the war. Does that justify the means? And that's mainly the argument he's putting across here. Now, of course, it was towards a political leader, but if you've got Machiavellian thinking, you're not really caring about those casualties. You're just going, right, yes, the end justify the means. This will do, everyone will end up better at the end of this. And that's like the first thing. Now, people might actually argue that and go, well, war's always the last option, and you shouldn't just go straight into invading, but that's not actually the argument here. What it is do the ends justify the means? So if you don't think that there should be sacrifices, big, and sometimes it can be very big sacrifices to justify these means, maybe you should just stand by. I mean, if we look at Switzerland in World War II, they sort of remain neutral. I know there are other countries as well that remain neutral, but for instance, they just let the Germans and basically the Germans and the Allies sort of just get it over with, and they would remain neutral. And that's why in The Sound of Music, that's why the family retreats there, because the war isn't going on there, and they remain neutral. So yeah, it basically comes down to, do you believe the ends justify the means? And there are things in this, like Augustine went on about a just war and things like that, but that's just an example. Another pro for a Machiavellian leader is that they're quite decisive, they're quite set upon their things. They're not complete dictators, they will ask for advice, as I mentioned earlier in the book. They, if they need advice, it's a good idea, he says, to ask for it. But at the same time, they're not being pushed around. Just because the public wants, they want lower taxes, but he might need these taxes to fight in a war. I keep using the war example, but they might, he's gonna. At the end of the day, it's gonna be his decision. So someone who's Machiavellian is probably gonna be a strong leader, and this is why they normally associate it with psychopaths and sociopaths, things like that, because those sort of people, although they may not be moral, they are normally in careers that they're doing quite well in their careers because they don't really care about the consequences. They just, they're going to get more money, they're going to do well, they put themselves first. But even in a political environment, that could be a good thing, because they could, at the end of the day, they don't want to lose their power. So if they're, just nice enough to their subjects, and to take land, it could do great for their people. They could, they end up getting all this money, or if it's for a big company, everyone that's within that company could do really well out of it. They've made a bigger, because he's decided to take, or she's decided to take a big risk. They've done it, they've succeeded, and as a result, all these people within the company can now get a raise, for example, or they've got more hours, or more people can be employed. So that's the pros there. Now the cons to that is an emotional argument. So do you really think that it's wise to have someone at the top of a company who's a sociopath? Because at the end of the day, they don't care about people. And that's not to say that they're a bad person or anything like that, because some of these people actually don't have morals. They don't know this. They've got something wrong with them. They're missing their super ego or even their ego to counteract them and go, actually, hang on. And this is a psychological thing. It is basically summed up primal instincts, what you want. I want this, I want that. For instance, I don't know, if I was hungry, I want food. Now, if you haven't, ego is a state where it gives you a bit of balance. So that's something you get when you're a little bit older, like when you're 4 years old. So for instance, if a baby, if they need to go to the toilet, they'll just go, because they've only got their id state. Ego, however, it'll be like when you're at toilet training, it's sort of training you, okay, I need the toilet, but I don't need to go straight away, but I still need it. So it's like giving you a bit of control. And then super ego is something that children tend to get at an older age. It's like 7, 9, that sort of area where they start to become aware of actually what's right and wrong, and it gives them more control over things. So that's why I think the Catholic Church at the age of 7 is when they say that kids are capable of aware of when they've done something morally wrong, and it's why children at nurseries, for example, it's better to try and get them to try and understand why, get them to ask them what do they think they've done wrong, because they're not normally aware of what they've done wrong, and sometimes you can't help that because they haven't quite got that capacity. I've seen it firsthand with children. Sometimes they're really not aware of it. So that's why it's always best not to be too harsh on them, because sometimes they're just not aware of what morals are. It's something that they develop later in life. But anyway, back to superego. It's a state where, like I said, you know what's right and wrong. It's not just, let's say you see a diamond necklace. Now, before, if you just had your id, you're just going to take that diamond necklace. I don't care. I want it, so you take it. Someone with an ego will be like, okay, I won't take it just now. Maybe I'll take it later. But super ego is like, is that yours though? Does that belong to you? And that's where the concept of morals comes. So back to the whole point of a sociopath is they normally struggle with these sort of things. They can't understand and comprehend right and wrong, or they don't care. They simply do not care. And so that means if they're, for instance, if they're just thinking about themselves, which they probably will be doing because they don't care about others, those subjects beneath them, if they're in power, are going to ultimately suffer, because let's say there's a war and they think they can win, but in order for them to win this war, they need to basically sacrifice all their men, children, women, all that. That's not going to be good for the people, is it, of that society? And that would be the argument against it. Okay, now another pro that I didn't actually touch upon at Pods the Prince was this. And a Machiavellian person is sort of aware of man's innate self-centeredness. So, for instance, if they're in a situation that may be life-threatening, you've got that fight or flight situation, they may be more likely to care about their self-preservation. So what they do is they draw on these weaknesses of men and use it to their advantage. So for example, if someone, look at like from sheep. So when sheep get scared, they sort of copy. If they see one get scared, they all copy that one sheep that's terrified normally, and then they all get panicky and they're all frolic. And it's like, sheep. You probably heard like, oh, you're being a sheep, you're copying someone, and that's essentially what it means by using it to your advantage. A Machiavellian leader can actually use it as a good thing because they can get them to imitate a good example. So, for example, if the leader shows positive traits, or even if he's maybe not a good person, he just presents himself with positive traits or someone to aspire to, they can copy it. They can copy them, and again, if the whole society does that, that's good, because if the society keep these good morals and keep these good things, they can do quite well. They can, there's less crime, there's things like that. Of course, it's not as willy-nilly and happy-go-lucky as that, but that's essentially what he was trying to put across. Now, again, you could argue this and say, well, hang on, that's quite deceitful. You'll present yourself as a good person, but are you? You're not really, and you're getting everyone to copy you and making you think you're a great person, but I don't think you are a good person. Or if you say they're not a good person, and that's not going to make you very happy. But again, it comes down to this: do the ends justify the means? And that's where you have to make your decision there. So there we have it, Machiavellian thinking summed up. Now, if there's one thing I want you to take from today's video, it's, do you think the ends justify the means? So if you think someone can be manipulated, but at the end it ultimately ends up being better for the people, is that something you're okay with? If you're going to have a leader who is basically a sociopath, doesn't care about emotions, but are going to care about themselves first, but are still going to care about their power, so they're going to be a strong leader, they're still going to ask for advice, they're still going to try their very best for that place, do you think that's okay? Would you be okay with that? Now, if you want to do further reading, there's actually a good film. It's called The Watchmen, and I said reading. I know that's not really technically reading, but I think The Watchmen actually does. I won't spoil the film for you, but right there near the ending, there's a good example of Machiavellian thinking. It's like the ending, and it's sort of like it leaves you in a morally grey area whether you think what happens is good or bad. So that would be one thing I recommend. There's also the Dark Triad, and I don't know much about this, but it's basically a subject in psychology that focuses on 3 personality traits, and these are normally seen as negative. So you've got narcissism, psychopathy, and again, Machiavellianism. And it implies these are dark characteristics that a person can have. So I might try and find something that you can have a look if you're interested in this sort of thing. It covers the areas rather well. But yeah, so that's everything for today. I'd like to thank my good friend Nico for coming on the show. Nico, do you have anything else to say to the audience before you go? Nope, nothing at all. You're sulking, aren't you? Alright, well, that's the show, I guess. So, thanks for watching, and here's hoping we have something more exciting in the new year.
Well, that's our show. But before we go, I want to send out a quick message.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. At the time I'm uploading this, it's nearly New Year's Eve. And I'd like to thank anyone who's actually watched these videos so far. I know I'm still trying to sort out some kinks and some things, and my video quality isn't the best at the moment, but it's a very small channel, so I'm hoping for the new year to actually start covering news articles. I did say in my original channel video that was the whole point of this, but I'm going to continue doing reading as well. I've got a lot of books I got for Christmas, so I might be doing some book reviews as well. But yeah, so if you liked the video, maybe give a like or subscribe, and here's hoping you have a good new year.